I can have them with you. Ceremonial purpose.
Yep, I probably don't have the rope.
All right. Good day, everybody. Madam Clerk,
Yes, sir.
I call this executive session to order. Attorney Brown.
Thank you, Mayor Johnson. Mayor Johnson, commissioners will request a motion to go into executive session for the discussion of personnel.
So moved.
Second.
All right, it's a motion and a second. Madam Clerk, we're voting.
Six, five, four. Lewis. Mr. Lewis, you voting? Okay, I thought, yeah. Yeah. That motion carries. Was Mr. Mason, Mr. Bobby Williams, and Mr. Brandon Garrett out?
Thank you, Madam Clerk. We're now suspended to executive session. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you guys for being here. Madam Clerk, I call this meeting back to order. Attorney Brown.
Thank you, Mayor Johnson, Commissioners. We will request a motion to execute the closed meeting affidavit.
So moved.
All right, there's a motion and a second. Madam Clerk, we're voting.
That motion carries with Mr. Mason, Bobby Williams, and Brandon Garrett.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Attorney Brown, are there any motions as a result of our executive session?
Yes, sir, Mayor Johnson. We will request a motion to approve the interim legal service transition plan, which, among other things, provide for the appointment of James T. Plunkett, Esquire, as interim general counsel commencing August 16th, 2024, and other terms listed therein.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you, Attorney Brown. Madam Clerk, we have a motion and a second. Seeing no colleagues in the queue, we're voting.
I'm in.
Oh, I'm sorry, Commissioner Lewis. You had the floor, sir.
Thank you, Mayor Johnson. Mayor Johnson, after hearing my colleague, I think it would be in the best interest of this city to extend the transitional period from 2 weeks to 4 weeks. From 2 weeks to 4 weeks.
For Attorney Brown?
For Attorney Brown, that is correct.
All right. Attorney Brown, is that a matter we need to discuss? Is that a discussion for private, or can we do that here on the floor?
No, it's a matter of
Make sure you turn your matter on.
No, it does not need to go back in executive session. It's a matter of whether people agree or not.
Okay.
Is this going to be a companion item, or is it going to be
It's part of.
part of this one?
just-
Okay.
Yes.
Would you reset the,
Yeah.
because I've already voted?
All right. Let's go through the queue. All right. Commissioner Lewis, you yield, so you have a motion and I have a second. Chair recognizes Commissioner Sean Franham.
I'm just confused because that ain't the conversation we just had. And why was nothing said back there? I mean, that's just disappointing that we come out here with a plan and then we come out here and there's a different plan. When we all agreed to a plan. So help me understand how that happened, Attorney Brown.
Mr. Lewis asked me, would I be willing to do 4 weeks? I told him that if that was the will of the body, what I placed in there was minimal. Commissioner Guilford had stated Mr. Guilford had commented that was a very short period for that type of transition.
But you're on, it would have been 2 weeks and then you're still on a 6 month because you're SES, correct?
Yes. It is whatever is the will of the body.
I just don't.
All right. Commissioner Wayne Guilfoyle.
You know, I did say back there in legal, but you told me there was going to be a 2-week transitional period. How did it change to 4?
It did.
The document has not changed.
Okay, but as far as extending you then has changed.
No, has not changed. The document remains the same. I made the motion to approve what we talked about,
Okay,
word for word.
okay. And then Mr. Lewis is suggesting what?
He believes that I guess he can speak for
Can I
himself.
speak? Can I speak?
Yes, sir. Commissioner Lewis, the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, now I did hear my colleague ask some questions about my colleague from the 10th made mention about was that enough time, and we didn't want to make sure that we didn't want to set anyone up for failure. So after the further discussion, I have a discussion with Attorney Brown and asked him, was the 2 weeks, based on the conversation, based on the question that my colleague from the 10th asked, I asked Attorney Brown, did he think that was a reasonable amount of time, the 2 weeks, to allow for council to come in and to be able to do what they need to do and not be set up for failure? And upon our further discussion, Mr. Brown said, well, 2 weeks is normally a good time, but sometimes if you have some extra time that you can allow for them to have some extra time, and that wouldn't be a problem. And I asked Mr. Brown, would it be a problem if you stayed an additional week or two? And he said to me that it would not. So that's why I made the motion.
All right, for clarity, when I said set up, I've got to respond to this one. My words were pretty plain and simple about the hours setting up for failure. I don't, and I appreciate it that you was willing to spend time and bring the new attorney on, but, this discussion should have been happening in the room instead of a private sidebar. And you'll probably find out that we wouldn't have discussion on this floor right now. I mean, we just got to do better. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Guilfoyle. Chair recognizes Commissioner Sean Prano.
I'm gonna let it go. Let it go.
All right, so there's a motion and there's a second. Please restate the motion, Commissioner Lewis. Your request.
My motion was that we extend, instead of 2 weeks of transitional period, with our legal counsel, now General Counsel Brown, with the new counsel, from the 2 weeks transitional period to a 4-week transitional period.
All right.
That would need to be put in the form of a substitute motion. I believe the first motion had already been motioned and second, I believe.
All right.
Unless the maker of the motion is willing to modify.
All right. Commissioner Lewis, please restate your motion as a substitute motion, if you don't mind.
Well, it was, Attorney Brown said the motion was made by myself and it was seconded. So what we can do is we can vote on the motion.
Who made the motion?
Yeah. Attorney Brown?
I have no idea who made the main motion.
The main motion, your mic, there you go.
To approve the document,
That's right.
I have Ms. McKnight and Wayne Guilfoyle second. For
For
the
the main
main
motion. So there
Now,
needs to be a substitute motion to extend Attorney Brown tenure for an additional 2 weeks, correct?
along with approving the legal service plan with Jim
Okay.
Plunkett being appointed as a transitional attorney, and extending 4-week extension of General Counsel Brown.
So is that additional 4 weeks or 2 weeks on top of the 2 weeks that you're? 2 weeks on top. Okay. All right. That's
So,
clarification.
Mr. Lewis, who seconded that? I didn't.
Commissioner
Mr.
Scott. So,
Okay.
Attorney Brown, just for the record, for this consideration, what would then be your end date? Instead of August 15th, what would that move to? August 30th? Turn your mic on, so.
August 29th. Days on to the 15th. Is that right?
Yeah.
Did you let Mr. Brown know? You talking a month, man?
The 4 weeks would be September the 12th.
All right, September 12th. All right.
August 29th?
All right. 2 weeks and 2 weeks.
It doesn't start until the 16th.
See, don't start until the 6th.
All right. Commissioner Lewis, you still in the queue, sir. Is there anything additional you'd like to add? He's out of the queue. Commissioner McKnight? All right.
Commissioner Franklin, right, the correction he made, so it would start on the 16th. That would be September the 13th.
September
Start on Friday,
13th.
end on Friday.
So that's September 13th. All right, so the date's September 13th. All right, let's vote, colleagues. Madam Clerk, just for clarification, let's vote on this. Can you restate the motion? Make sure we have it, including the date.
Motion is to approve the legal service plan with appointing Attorney Jim Plunkett for the transitional attorney and extending a 4-week extension, General Counsel Brown, to September 3rd, 2024.
All right, thank you, Madam Clerk. We're voting.
13th?
Substitute, correct?
Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
All right, we're voting.
That motion carries 6-2 with Ms. McKnight and the mayor voting no.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Attorney Brown, does that conclude our business for this session?
Yes, it does, sir.
And Mr. Mason, Mr. Williams, and Mr. Garrett out.
Thank you so much. Madam Clerk, does that conclude our business?
Yes, sir.
If so, this meeting is hereby adjourned, and we're moving forward into the land bank discussion meeting. All right. Mr. Jackson, you ready? All right, let's go.
Good afternoon, Mayor, Commissioners, and public. We invite you to this 2 p.m. meeting for the Land Bank work session. Everyone should have an agenda, and we have copies, I think, on the desk here for anyone who wants to have a copy of the agenda. There are 4 items. We'll have an introduction to the Augusta Land Bank staff, board members. We'll have a presentation about the history of the land bank, and then we will move to how the land bank typically operates in general. And then we will have a discussion about neighboring land banks. And I will turn it over to Mr. Sean Edwards, Executive Director.
No, ma'am, I do not. Thank you. And if you ladies and gentlemen don't mind, I'm Chris Johnson, Tax Commissioner and Chairman of the Augusta, Georgia Land Bank Authority. I don't look quite like Sean Edwards, but I will do my best Sean Edwards imitation for just a few moments. Wanted to take this opportunity to, one, introduce the staff and the board members that we have here of the Augusta, Georgia Land Bank Authority, as well as give a brief history before I turn it back over to Mr. Edwards so that he can introduce our guest for today. We are very thankful to Commissioner Pulliam as well as Administrator Dowse and to this board for giving these ladies and gentlemen an opportunity to give us some understanding of how land banking works in general, how land banking works in the state of Georgia, and the benefit of some of their experience. Very thankful for the members of the Center of Community Progress who are here, as well as the directors of the land banks in both Metro Atlanta as well as Chatham County, of who Mr. Edwards will introduce you to here shortly. With us today, we have obviously our director, Mr. Sean Edwards, who is the director of Augusta, Georgia Land Bank Authority. We also have another staff member, Ms. Kimara Jones, who is with us. We do not have with us, but one of the other staff members, Ms. Lisa Williams, who's been with us quite some time. Very fortunate to have one of our board members, our tax assessor, Mr. Scott Roundtree. We have our land bank attorney, Mr. John Manton. We also have our member, Ms. Karen Gordon, who is also a board member representing the cultural community. And then, of course, I serve as your chair of the Augusta, Georgia Land Bank Authority. Just a brief history of the land bank. Augusta, Georgia Land Bank was established back in 1997. At that time, they had 4 members. It was the city administrator, the director of license and inspection, the director of housing and neighborhood development, as well as Attorney Harry James. We didn't necessarily give him a designation in that legislation. In 2005, as well as in 2007, there were some amendments made, but we still had a four-member board. That was the city administrator, the director of planning and zoning, the director of planning and zoning, the director of licensing, the tax commissioner. And the original purpose for the Augusta, Georgia Land Bank Authority was to help acquire properties, help to get properties for housing and community development, to start doing some building. The city was doing something a little bit new. It was serving as its own general contractor and was doing some of the development of which we see now, for example, in Heritage Pines. And so the purpose of the land bank initially was transactional, and that was to acquire properties for that purpose. In 2012, there was some new legislation, Georgia legislation that was created, and it required you to have an uneven amount of board members ranging anywhere from 5 to 11. Augusta adopted a 5-member board, which consisted of the city administrator, the director of planning and development, the deputy director of planning and development, the tax assessor, and then the tax commissioner. Then in 2019, recognizing that we were government heavy. Not only we were government heavy, we wanted to make sure that there was representation from the community. And so then Commissioner Kendrick came to this body and made a recommendation that we go to a 7-member board, which was approved, and that 7-member board included the tax commissioner, the tax assessor, the director of planning and development, and then, of course, 3 at-large members. And we included, at that time, a representative from the cultural community, a representative of the ecclesiastical community, and a representative from businesses, from business. At any rate, that is just a real quick evolution of this particular board, and we want to give our guests an opportunity to tell you a little bit about land banking, so that as you make decisions about your land bank, the future of your land bank, the direction that you want your land bank to go in, you're armed with information that will help you do so. And again, thank you to this body, and I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Edwards at this time.
I'll only be here with you briefly. Good afternoon. I just want to take a quick moment to introduce Ms. Sarah Toring and Ms. Odetta McLeish White from Center for Community Progress. They've been an outstanding partner for land banks in Georgia as well as across the country. A great partner for us here in Augusta in order to be able to ensure that in my transition into this role, I understand how land banks operate and helping to build relationships and partnerships that make us effective in the community. So we will welcome up Sarah and Odetta in order to be able to give you an overview of how land banks operate.
Thank you so much, Sean. Can everyone hear me all right? Always great. Mayor Johnson and commissioners, thank you so much for having us today. One moment while I pull up the slides. Mine read only works. Wonderful. Thank you all so much. My work here today, I'm Odetta McLeish White, the Director of Engagement for the Center for Community Progress. My colleague here, Sarah Toring, will speak a little bit after me. We just have a few slides to provide some pretty high-level context for land banking in Georgia. Very quickly, just a little bit about the Center for Community Progress, which is a national nonprofit that was founded around 2007, 2008 to foster, as it says, strong, equitable communities where vacant, abandoned, and deteriorated properties, that's a lot of words, so we just say VAD properties, are transformed into assets for neighbors and neighborhoods. We do this by educating community members, working technical assistance with municipalities about how they can better understand VAD and systemic vacancy in their communities. We advocate at state, local, and federal levels for equitable policy and practice change, and deliver customized and expert guidance to any partner that would like to learn more about systemic vacancy. We always find it helpful just to think a little bit about why you would want to focus on repairing VAD properties in communities. There are several negative impacts that we like to make sure we're all focused on. Really, public health, many of you will already know some of these. You can have vacant properties that harbor vermin, illegal activity, but there's also tremendous psychological impact on communities that have lived for sometimes generations around vacant, abandoned properties. Individually, folks whose properties are near vacancy or who are dealing with that themselves, they lose the individual equity in their homes, which they can then not pass along to their descendants and their families. Sometimes the deterioration can exceed the repair cost, and insurance and other costs will go up while the value of the property is decreasing in the market. And finally, as a community, there's a shared fiscal impact, lowering property values, reducing the tax base, and at the same time, you still are sending out and spending money on code enforcement, sometimes to mow the lawns and maintain the property, and of course, it continues to feed into the cycle of vacancy. So what is a land bank? As it says here, a land bank is a public authority or nonprofit that focuses on the conversion of VAD, delinquent and foreclosed properties, to support equitable community development outcomes. Center for Community Progress does also incubate the National Land Bank Network, which tracks nationwide how land banking is working. And so just a few data points. There are over 300 land banks across the country. It's a relatively new strategy, with over 80% of those being established since 2008. 84% of the existing land banks work under state enabling legislation, and you can see by the map where those states are. Michigan, Ohio, New York, Pennsylvania, and Georgia have the largest number of land banks across the country. And here in Georgia, some of the oldest land banks were founded. And approximately 90% of properties in inventory are acquired through tax foreclosure. So it's certainly wonderful to have the great support here of your tax commissioner. A very quick overview of key powers of Georgia land banks. They can acquire properties by donation, by local government transfer from the creating county and city, and also through market. Properties can be acquired at tax sales using a credit bid in the absence of private bidders. Very powerfully, land banks can extinguish delinquent taxes and some liens, and can also hold properties tax exempt, sort of a gift of time moment where properties that might be utilized in the future for community redevelopment or affordable housing or any type of community goal can be held off the tax rolls and then released to a new owner in service of a larger plan. And perhaps very importantly, land banks have the power to return properties that they have cleared of taxes and other encumbrances with flexibility. What is the ultimate goal and need of the community? Is it best to sell a property? Is it best to donate a property? Your local land bank can make those decisions according to the input that it's receiving from its board and its staff and community residents. We also always want to point out how land banks must work through partnership. There is no way for any one land bank to be an expert in all the possible end uses of a vacant property. So this infographic just sort of speaks to some of the ways that you can repurpose vacant, abandoned, or deteriorating property for climate effects, green stormwater infrastructure. There's a huge discussion around affordable housing right now, side lot sales, pocket parts, et cetera. These are just a few. All of them require specialized expertise and great relationship building, and that is a space that your land bank can help build and effectively deploy. We did want to let you know that there are several resources on land banking in Georgia on the communityprogress.org website. These are just some pictures there. There's our link. We also have a great conference coming up in October, so if you're interested in learning more, we are absolutely here to work with you. Here are our emails as well, and I will invite Sarah to come up next.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mayor, Commissioners. Thank you for having us today. I want to just go back if I can. Oop. I'd like to make just a couple, I want to get to the map page, if you can help me. My name is Sarah Turing. I'm a senior fellow with the Center for Community Progress. I'm also an attorney in private practice here in Georgia. I work with most of the land banks in Georgia. Oh, it's okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Want that there?
I work with most of the land banks here in Georgia and also with land banks around the country. The reason I wanted to go to this slide and draw your attention to it, I first came to know this land bank through Sean's predecessor, Mr. Michael, when I worked with him, leadership in Augusta, and also Mr. Norman, Ms. Goldie, who you'll hear from in a moment, who are the true experts, to draft the 2012 Georgia Land Bank Act, which passed unanimously in the Georgia legislature. At that time, there were probably 80 land banks in the country, about that number. As you've seen, since that time, we're up to about 300. But I wanted to note, just for your attention, that many of those states that you can see that have state land bank enabling legislation, that legislation was based on the Georgia legislation in many cases. Georgia land banks have been leading around the country for many years. Many Georgia land bank leaders, including folks from the Augusta Land Bank, have offered education, teaching through community progress and other events all over the country. A couple of just quick things in terms of nuts and bolts. Land banks acquire property here in Georgia and around the country in a variety of ways, and their basic job is to acquire, maintain, and dispose of property. Land banks can acquire property through the tax sale process. Indeed, they were designed initially out of the observation that tax delinquency and vacancy and abandonment correlate, right? And particularly where we have properties where tax debt may outweigh the fair market of the value of the property itself, that's going to be a property that is dead to the market, right? Land banks were created in part out of that observation. Land banks now, both here in Georgia and around the country, typically operate as tools in partnership with other local government entities and departments to do this equitable community development, to get properties back into good, productive use that serves the entire community, and to remediate vacancy abandonment. Augusta is not alone. I understand you all have significant goals and commitments around housing affordability and challenges. Augusta is not alone. That is a challenge certainly in every community that I am working with in Georgia and in every community that I am working with around the country, rural, urban, suburban, you name it. Land banks on their best days can be really important partners in that larger housing affordability conversation. Mr. Norman and Ms. Goldie will be able to give a plethora of examples of their leadership, certainly leadership here in Augusta. But increasingly, land banks are taking a stronger and stronger role in that affordable housing conversation and development conversation. So happy to answer any questions if we can later, any questions from the commissioners. But glad to be here, and thank you for your time.
I didn't want to presume. I would think that it would be the will of the body to continue the presentations and do questions at the end.
Yes, sir, please, let's continue.
So I'd like to ask Mr. Chris Norman from the Atlanta Metro Land Bank to come and join you now in order to be able to give you some insights as to how he is operating and running the Atlanta Land Bank.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for having us here. Happy to be down and our friends in Augusta and talk a little bit about land banks. As per my introduction, Chris Norman, I'm the Executive Director of the Metro Atlanta Land Bank. That's our DBA. The legal name is a mouthful. It's the Fulton County City of Atlanta Land Bank Authority, Inc. But we rebranded to become the Metro Atlanta Land Bank and for the purpose of doing business, and that was recent. I've been around the land bank in Atlanta, it's been about 18 years now. And 5 of those years was spent as a member of the board, and subsequently took over as the executive director in 2010, August of 2010, and have been in that role since. So I want to give you a little bit of a sense of Atlanta and what we're doing in our land bank. It is as alluded to, some of the oldest land banks are in Georgia. We're actually the 4th oldest land bank of all the land banks. And so we were created in 1991. And part of the conversation around that time was prior to me, but I know anecdotally, is that we were brought on pre-Olympics. You know, Olympics came to Atlanta in 1996, and there was a lot of interest in doing a couple of things. One was making the city more livable, creating housing, market and affordable housing, but also cleaning up some of the blight that existed as we welcomed the world to Metro Atlanta. And so one of the tools created, that's when Maynard Jackson was mayor, was the land bank. And it became really operational around 1993, 94. So we've been kind of full tilt. 30 years is actually our operational birthday this year. And so there's been quite a journey for the land bank. I'll give you kind of a sense of that. We were really focused on the business of clearing taxes for a lot initially, and doing some green space assemblages. As mentioned, the land banks do have the ability to clear title. That's in cooperation and coordination with your school system. If you look at the statute, a consent by your school board is required, and so we work closely with the Atlanta Public Schools and our tax commissioner to clear thousands of properties to get them back on the tax rolls, and we call that conduit, basically tax clearing is what we did for a long time. And so we had some level of ownership, but we really, in 2009, is when we got into I call it the dirt business. That's when we really kind of started holding land and actually managing property for a variety of reasons. We bought a foreclosed property back in 2009, which is an old apartment complex, using empowerment zone money. If anybody's been around that was part of the old Clinton era, presidential era, and we used that to buy a foreclosed apartment complex. And that ended up turning into 45 units of senior housing that we did in coordination with the local developer. And so we decided and have determined that land banks are critical tools that they can do a lot of things that other entities cannot. So Metro Atlanta, we do have a robust housing authority. We have a great development authority called Invest Atlanta. You may have heard of that. We have a huge project going on there now called the Beltline, which is 20% of the property in the city of Atlanta by geographic footprint. And then you have obviously our city, Department of Planning, et cetera, and then you have the land bank. And so this past Monday, I was in a meeting with the mayor. So we actually have a group called the Strike Force, which basically consists of all the 5 entities that really touch property in Atlanta. And then adjunct to that, we have MARTA, and we also have Atlanta Public Schools, and we have some key nonprofits. And I say that because, as Odetta and Sarah mentioned before, we don't operate in vacuums. We operate in partnership. We have a high focus on creativity. I would say this about the land banks, and I actually have the privilege of serving along with my buddy Allison, and we've been across the state for years. So I'm the president, she's the vice president of the Georgia Association of Land Bank Authorities, and that was created when we did that, when Sarah and her colleagues helped us pass the legislation. So we focus highly on partnerships, creativity, innovation. So I often refer to the land banks as kind of your, it's effectively a real estate company. If you basically dissect the statute, we can do all those things that Sarah mentioned. We can acquire property from a variety of places. We can hold it in a variety of different means, and we can dispose of it. We can also develop property. We can joint venture, develop. We can even hold property that has tenants, if you so choose to do that. So it's kind of up to the community. One of the key marquee elements of the land bank and the legislation is that it's basically set up to be tailored to the use and desires and needs of the local community. So I'm kind of level setting a little bit of how we view the land bank and how we fit into our ecosystem and what are the kinds of things that we do. And that we were founded by the city and the county. We received general fund money from the city. We received general fund money from the county to support the annual operations of the land bank. We also do transactions, and we can receive and keep profit that we make off of those transactions. That also lends to basically supporting the operations. We've also received grants from other entities, Fannie Mae, JP Morgan, Ford Foundation, Enterprise. These are other entities that have supported us over the years, Community Foundation, basically putting money into the land bank to support transactions and deals. So what are we up to nowadays? So nowadays, we basically have quite a variety of things. We are, in essence, we're the acquisition agent for the city of Atlanta. One of the things we're doing right now is highly focused on affordable housing. We're trying to generate 20,000 units of housing in Atlanta. The land bank has been tasked with acquiring property. We just bought 11 acres of land. We're about to buy 5.8 acres of land. We're buying some additional properties all throughout major corridors in the city of Atlanta, with the intent of holding those and getting those to developers who are going to build what we want them to and need to do. We're working closely with our tax commissioner now, and tax assessor and our city attorney and everyone else to actually foreclose on demolition liens that have existed in the city for decades. And as those are foreclosed on, because basically they've just been vacant lots. They are the VADs that Odetta talked about. These are basically lots that have been vacant, overgrown, problems, nobody has come back to develop them. So we're foreclosing on those, and those are coming into the land bank to be held, and in coordination with all these other parties I just mentioned, we're going to find developers to go those vertical and get rid of these vacant lots. We're taking in, so that's multifamily and single-family properties we're bringing in. One interesting twist, some of those properties are going to the police foundation. So we're actually building cadet and recruit housing in the city, because one of the things we found is that 30% of the officers only 30% of officers live in Atlanta, because Atlanta has gotten expensive. And so we're trying to put more affordable housing in the city. So that's one program we're working on. We have another book of properties sitting out there that we're planning on. So that represents 220 parcels. We have another 1,000 parcels that we're about to go after to bring in through the land bank under that program. The city gave us $6 million to buy these properties, and what I've mentioned before, we've actually on pace to spend all that money in the next 2 months. We got that money back in October. So within under a year, we're going to expend $6 million on acquiring property in Atlanta, and that's via a line of credit with our development authority. That's another creative way to deal with land banks. We created something called the Land Banking Program, which effectively allows all of our nonprofits in the city of Atlanta to bank their property with us. And I describe it, in essence, think of a bank account, but your currency is dirt and property. So you can put your property into the land bank for up to 5 years. We maintain it. You pay us to do that. We insure it. While you either get assemblages done, arrange your financing, your development plans, and all this other kind of stuff, because we are patient, we're short-term patient landowners. So we can hold that property while these nonprofits do their deal to do the stuff we really need, which is this affordable community-based housing or infill development. And then they withdraw their property out of us to basically do this. And that program we started back in 2010 with the assistance of Frank Alexander, who was one of the co-founders of the Center for Community Progress. And that's been replicated across the country. It started in Atlanta, and a lot of people are doing that now. So literally every nonprofit in Atlanta has done that. And I think we did a good enough job where now we even manage property for Invest Atlanta. The city puts property into our coffers to manage. Westside Future Fund, if you've heard of them, Atlanta Neighborhood Development Partnership, all these other groups in Atlanta, we do hold their property and develop it. So we have that land banking program. We also have a series of deeds, troubled deeds that basically existed in the city and county. They transferred them to us, say, hey, can you untangle the title? We're untangling title, clearing off errors and impediments, and now we basically have fee simple property to sell to developers and all that. So that's another bulk of properties, because the whole goal at the end of the day is, my joke is always, we want to work ourselves out of business because I want to get rid of all this troubled property in the city. And so here are more parcels that have trouble that nobody wants to deal with. We're cleaning up to get back online. So we are dealing with these sheriff and marshal deeds, that tax deed kind of properties that we're clearing up as well. So that's another program that we're doing. We helped to co-found the Atlanta Land Trust in Atlanta, which is a community land trust. I actually served as the chair of the board there for 7 years, and we got that going. And we have a permanent board seat on the Land Trust Board, the Land Bank does. And that's critical because the Land Bank comes into possession of properties via all those different means that were identified, and these properties can go to the Land Trust that's building housing around the Beltline. Donations, interesting twist there. We have received REO properties from banks, from the Fulton County District Attorney. We received property from the United States Attorney when they basically have done criminal cases against, there's been money laundering, drug cases, all sorts of things. They take the property down. They're not in the housing business or land business. We are. So they give it to us to process and put out to other folks. So you can kind of see that the umbrella of things you can do under land banks is quite broad and quite creative. We are also have taken 2 of those parcels from the U.S. Attorney, and we're actually doing a joint venture development program right now with a local developer. They're building 10 townhomes. 2 of them are building at cost. And we're a joint venture partner, a 20% partner in that, and we'll be selling those to qualified residents. So all to say, this kind of gives you a little bit of some broad strokes of land banks. And no land bank is the same. Let me also make that caveat. So when we go and talk to our 30 partners across the state of Georgia, none of the 30 land banks operate exactly the same. And that's okay, because that's by design. You may only want to do green space. You may want to do land trust. You may want to do business Main Street revitalization. You may want to do market housing. It's kind of up to you what you want to do, but the tools remain the same. And that framework is basically up to you. And so I'll point out also for governance, we also operate with currently 7 members on the board. 4 are appointed by the city, 3 are appointed by the county. We also have an advisory board member by the school system that attends. They don't vote, but they do come to the meetings. And then also we recently voted to expand. So we're actually picking up the city of South Fulton to come into the Metro Atlanta Land Bank. And now we have the geographic territory of Atlanta and the city of South Fulton, which is actually almost the same geographic size, not population, for Atlanta. And any city in Fulton County can actually join our land bank. So there may be more in the future. So it's not a stagnant entity. It's a very vibrant tool. It is kind of an organic thing that we're all collectively participating in these micro experiments across the country of trying to figure out the best ways to deal with all of these problems that we have relative to property, meeting the needs of our citizens, and creating vibrant and safe communities. So I think I kind of maybe hit, I know I gave you a lot, but I think I'm trying to give you some broad strokes of what a land bank can do, what it can evolve in. And last thing before I pass the baton to my friend here, Allison, we were also involved in the neighborhood stabilization program that came through. And the federal government, you may recall, and everything melted down. They put $6 billion out through the United States. And we managed $9 million that came through the city to basically buy property, hold it, and find developers. So we did everything from the acquisition. We actually ran the RFPs and the RFQs on our side. It wasn't the city. So your land bank can do everything. And all this stuff we've done, we've had 5 people. So that's been our staff size, but we also have virtually, it's almost like a 15-person organization because we have outside counsel, outside consultants, outside property management, et cetera. So that gives you a sense of where we are. So, Allison, I'm going to bring you up, and you can kind of give them the lay of land of life in Savannah, and probably Macon, too. So, yeah, all right.
Thank you, Chris, and good afternoon. Thank you for having us here today to talk about land banks, one of my favorite subjects. I'm Allison Goldie. I am the current executive director of the Chatham County City of Savannah Land Bank, but actually started the land bank in Macon, Georgia back in 1997. And ran that for 22 years before I moved to Savannah. So I was around when you created your land bank. I've actually been over here to Augusta a couple of times way back when to talk with you guys, and so I'm excited to be here today. As Chris said, you're not going to find a land bank that works the same, because when they wrote the law for land banks, they wrote it very flexibly. And as you create your land bank, most cities and counties create their land bank through an intergovernmental agreement. Then you get to decide what you want to do in your local jurisdiction and what your priorities are within that law. And so when we started out, I started out with a focus on neighborhood revitalization. So I went and interviewed with the board, which at the time was 4 members, and I said, what would I do in a typical day? And they said, we don't really know, because this land banks were new in the 90s. So they sent me up to the Atlanta Land Bank Authority, and I spent 4 days there, and I said, what in the heck have I gotten myself into? Because Macon is not Atlanta, right? And so I had to go back and kind of figure out, what are we going to do? So we worked very closely with the City of Macon's housing department, and we decided we were going to do neighborhood revitalization. And then we were going to pick an area where we could go in and make a difference. We weren't going to scatter lot pick up properties. We were going to pick some blocks where we could go in, acquire enough properties to have critical mass. And our priority was to acquire properties that were blighted, underutilized, and then return those properties back to a productive use through affordable housing. And that's exactly what we did. We picked some neighborhoods. We used some funds from the city. We partnered with our housing authority. As has been mentioned before, partnership is key. Land banks can't do it by themselves. So we actually had several neighborhoods that we worked in and developed, and we had a partnership with the city where the city provided home funds to build the homes. The land bank did all of the acquisition, including acquisition under the regulations of federal dollars, the Uniform Relocation Act, which is no easy feat, but our land bank became the land bank that was expert in that. So the city used us to go out and purchase properties and then help, if there was somebody who wanted to sell their property that was occupied, we actually helped relocate those folks within the Uniform Relocation Act guidelines. So I'm throwing this stuff out to say land banks can do a lot of different things depending on your projects and what you need. So that grew into a much larger project where the city got a Hope 6 project, and they needed properties from the land bank to do off-site in order to get points for that Hope 6 project. So land bank stepped in. We acquired 25 properties around that were going to be leased to purchase homes, and we enabled them to get their points so that they could get their Hope 6 application approved. I don't know if you're familiar with low-income housing tax credit applications, but we in Savannah are actually involved in some of that too. We have one right now where the Land Bank Authority owns the property, and we have a nonprofit that won a low-income housing tax credit award because the land bank owned it, and we leased that property to Mercy Housing for $100 a year. And they built 85 affordable housing units, so we have multifamily there where the land bank owns the property and leases it. So we evolved, and I'm going to back up to Macon again, and we started to figure out, I had to figure out, what does a land bank do? I said I would give it 2 years. I'm at 27 years now land banking. So we actually entered agency agreements with a lot of our nonprofits and said, let us be the folks to get your land for you. So even Habitat for Humanity would enter an agency agreement with us, which I found out this week they still have to this day there in Macon, where Land Bank buys all of their properties for them. They don't have to worry about getting out and dealing with the real estate aspects of acquiring their properties. Even if someone comes in to donate a property, they actually call the land bank and say, Land Bank, I've got somebody who wants to donate a property. Can you handle it for us? So we created a niche to be able to work with the Urban Development Authority there and nonprofits to acquire properties on their behalf. We also, in Macon, acquired a school from the school board, and that was turned into senior housing, where we actually had folks that went to grammar school in that school, and now they're retired and living there. So how cool is that? They were like, oh, I used to take math over here in this room where Mr. Sellers lives. So kind of a cool project. It's a beautiful project. It's gorgeous. So I actually moved to Savannah. Savannah courted me, and I had to think about it a little bit, but you know, Savannah's a pretty great place to live. So I moved on down the road, went to Savannah, and COVID hit. But we have some really cool projects going on in Savannah. One of those is we accepted a 5-acre plot of land, parcel of property from the city. The city put in the infrastructure on that parcel of land, and now then we lease the property to a nonprofit development corporation, and they are building 38 tiny homes on that property with a resident services building on it. And once they're completely built, then they're going to sign that lease over to our homeless authority, and they're going to manage the services for that development. Land Bank's going to continue to own that land. We have a 25-year lease, and so they will be leasing that from us. They have a really good reputation. They've done a veterans-only tiny homes project. They've actually had folks that have moved from a tiny home into a house. They have purchased a house. You hear about the continuum of housing. Land banks can play a huge role in that. So in the last couple of years, we have really gotten more involved in actually helping folks experiencing homeless. And we like to say helping folks exiting homelessness, because that's what we're helping folks to do. We're looking at a couple of deals that are going to be multifamily, that will be permanent supportive housing for people, 2-bedroom apartments, multifamily. And we are also right now kind of venturing into possibly working with private developers where the land bank would own the property and be able to provide a tax exempt status on that property in exchange for them providing us with affordable housing for 50 years or 100 years. Or we're just kind of looking at that, and that's something that maybe if we could work out, we might want to do on a regular basis. So I'm throwing a lot out there at you, and I'm going to echo what they've said. You can get really, really creative with your land bank. You get to decide at your local level what you want to do with your land bank based on your priorities. I've been watching your land bank ever since I came here, because you guys started at about the same time we did. And it is such an asset. It's such an asset for you. And sometimes you don't even know what you need a land bank for until a project falls in your lap and you think, how can we use this? And you start brainstorming. We would sit around the table every Monday morning at 9 o'clock and say, how do we make this project work? And sometimes I had other places I wanted to be, and sometimes we fought, I'll be honest. But a land bank is an asset and a tool and a real estate arm for you to do a lot of creative projects. And I think you already are doing a lot of creative projects here and have been doing creative projects. Another thing that we're doing as our land bank is, our land bank decided we are really going to emphasize affordable housing now. So we actually passed a program stating that if we acquire a piece of property, we're going to require that it be available as an affordable house. And we're going to put a 10-year affordability restriction on it. So here's a way where your land bank can be flexible, because your land bank can set the sales price on a property, and they can set the criteria for the sale of that property. So we have criteria with our sales that are passed by our board where a property has to remain affordable for at least 10 years. We will also let a developer, if they want to come in and say do 4 properties, we'll say, okay, you're going to do 4 properties for us. You can do 2 at market rate, but you have to do 2 at affordable. So we set maximum sales prices on the homes that they develop and that are sold to those developers. If they're going to be rental projects, then they're going to have to adhere to the local fair market rents and can't exceed those fair market rents. We're in a housing crisis in Savannah, and I assume you probably are here too. Where are our folks going to live? Where are the people, where are the nurses, where are the teachers, where are the policemen, where are the hospital workers going to live? And land banks have a prime opportunity right now to step in and fill that gap, because we can make it happen. We don't have to put that property out to bid. So I'm throwing a lot at you, but we are excited at where land banks are going now. I've seen the evolution of land banks over a quarter of a century. That sounds horrible. It makes me feel really old. But I think now is the time for us to even take it to the next level as land banks. And you guys have a perfect opportunity to make that happen. You're already on the map. people already know about the Augusta Richmond Land Bank Authority. So this is really an opportunity to just get creative and continue. So Georgia is rising in our land banks. We have 30 land banks now. We have a land bank in Rome, Georgia that's now doing their own development. Little Rome, Georgia, stepping out as a developer. So I'm going to be quiet right now because they've said a lot of the things I would have said. But if you have questions or, today, or if you think about something down the road, please feel free to reach out.
Cue up the last portion of this, and then, of course, take questions from the body. So in preparing for the day, one of my board members thought that it would be important in order to give you a little backdrop on Augusta. And these images won't be new to you. This is what we deal with on a day-to-day basis. But when I came into this organization, or prior to, let me take one step back and give an opportunity for some expansion. When I first started working for the City of Augusta in 2008, I was just a manager in housing and community development, running your NSP program, Neighborhood Stabilization Program. If it wasn't for the land bank, we wouldn't have met federal regulatory requirements because the City of Augusta was not going to accept those foreclosed homes from those banks. So it was the land bank that made it possible for city to receive not only a first tranche in NSP 1, but also a third tranche in NSP 3. And we did that with a 3-person team working under the leadership of the director and assistant director. But there was a manager, there was an assistant, and there was an inspector that was responsible for more than $4 million with no regulations, no rules, and no plan. And we sat in the lab, quoting Hawthorne Welcher often, we sat in the lab many a night trying to figure out how to make sure we stayed compliant, but also gave community what they needed, which was a stop to the bleed when it came to foreclosures on those resales. I left and went back to my hometown for a period of time, and when I returned, I came as the deputy director for that department, and you had already issued bond financing in order to do the Laney Walker Bethlehem Revitalization Project. If it wasn't for the land bank, that project would not have seen success because, again, you had to hold and accrue properties in order to be able to get those projects done. And while on the ground, greeting those homeowners, working with local banks, putting ourselves in positions in order to be able to ensure that for as much market rate housing we were also producing affordable and workforce housing. Those efforts all came in partnership with the Land Bank Authority. But in coming into this role in 2019, some of the things that land banks deal with, the VADs that were described earlier by Sarah and Odetta and Chris and Allison, and thank y'all again for the information for this body today, those things were still there. We suffer with a tremendous amount of vacancy, abandonment, and deterioration within our communities, primarily within the urban core, and that's not new to you. But some of the things that we've tried to institute since taking this seat more directly tackle that issue of blight. So yes, you still have structures like this that exist throughout our community, but we're taking possession of those either as no bids at tax sales, direct bids at non-judicial sales, donations of people who just want to walk away from a property, but also now being able to clear some of those, demolishing those structures, clearing those lots, and putting the properties into responsible persons' hands so that what you end up with is something that's viable for a community, reducing the potential of crime, reducing what will be vermin, increasing what is value in community, and putting you in a position where somebody would actually make an investment. Now, my background is in banking. Well, you think about what my background is. For a minute, I was lost because I got an English degree and thought I was going to be an actor. But I ended up in banking because I needed to pay my rent. In banking private market, the bottom line is the dollar. And that's not to be mean, but investors have to be repaid. Debt service has to be covered. It is only government that can afford to lose money on a deal. So when I came into this role in government, I came with a private market mindset that everybody's got to be made whole. Well, government can make concessions. So if the concession is going to be made and if there is money that's going to be lost, that should be for community benefit. That should be for the residents that put their tax dollars into the government coffer in order to be able to generate those programs and services if there's going to be a loss. But in my experience working in housing and community development, working in community planning and development in Savannah, working in Macon-Bibb County, and working in Richmond County, You don't have to take a loss if you do the deal right on the front end in planning. It doesn't have to be subsidized affordable housing or subsidized workforce housing. You can institute programs through your land bank and make private market folks come out of pocket because they're getting profit. In fact, we know the profit because we review the pro forma. So when I came into this role, I made that part of the application process is I got to see how much profit you're making on the deal. And when it's exponential, you have room then in order to be able to give something back. So can you invest in green space? Can you do something by way of urban agriculture? Can you help with the blighted properties around those that you're selling? More importantly, though, we started working with folks that are doing this constantly. This is down in Old Town, as you can see. Old Town hadn't had any new construction other than Mr. Eckley's house at the corner of Telfair and 2nd. First person to build something new in Old Town, and God knows when, did that on a land bank lot prior to me coming into the community. We've now been able to work with M Builders, one of the companies owned by Wayne Millar, establishing comps in Old Town that had not existed. And were it not for the restructuring of a deal that he had already entered into with some partners in order to make it feasible coming out of COVID to meet his requirements to the land bank, those houses that are built on 2nd would have never been constructed. There was a series of conversations and digging deep into several contractors' performers on multiple properties. The land bank had entered into a multi-phase transfer of over 50 lots to produce what was supposed to be 40 houses, and then prices on markets and materials went up. There was no way they were going to be able to produce it. But they still had access to land that needed to be built out. And the community still needed that to happen. So when we stood in front of the media in 2020 and said new houses are coming to Old Town, when everybody else said you can't build in COVID, yes, you can. And inevitably, we got him to a point where he did. The before and after. And we see this on many corners in many neighborhoods within our core when we could be seeing new houses built. But what else have we done? We were a part of the ad hoc committee that created your redevelopment area and blighted properties program ordinance. But after its establishment, we continue to meet with your city law department and your code enforcement department to track those properties that have been put into that program so that we can try to get them to a point where the land bank can acquire them. I'm working for over a year on that just to get you your first produced properties moved from blighted ordinance approved through the fee structure to make that something we can foreclose on. Homeless Task Force. Since its establishment, it's been your land bank authority here that made it possible for your first tiny house project to even have life because of a transfer that the city felt positive about putting into our hands that we've now put into a nonprofit organization's hands, Bridge Builders. In addition to that, my board trusted me to foreclose on a property that will soon be in our inventory that's going to be your first respite center since we had the closing of Coordinated Health. We're making efforts to try to reduce homelessness and keep people out of the housing instability, that pipeline, so that we can put ourselves into a position where we can see some change. And our land development conference. Land banks in Georgia continue to lead. We have spoken with land banks all over the country. Some suggested by Center for Community Progress, others that just have met us at national level conferences around that we've attended. We wanted to put ourselves in a spot where Augusta could be highlighted in such a way, and we are now entering into our 4th year with that. Investors, developers, private market, nonprofit, churches, and individuals that want to get into this business not only come to learn about land banking, but how do you do real estate development? Because they're paying consultants to teach them stuff online that they're meeting through YouTube and TikTok that we will teach them for free. But we're going to step further this year. Because as noted multiple times, we're in an affordable housing crisis, and it's not going to be met through just government subsidies. You've got to have lenders get involved. So we're partnering with the Neighborhood Assistance Corporation of America, NACA, the nonprofit, primary residence only, first lien mortgage only, below market rate, 100% financing, no down payment, no closing costs. They've now decided to get into the development business because they weren't seeing the kind of outputs that they needed. And Mr. Marks was kind enough, I can pull the link, may have to hit escape, to give a message to the body. If I can pull the link, Told you I wanted to be an actor. I didn't say I would be a good one. And I'm going to ask Natasha for some help. There's a hyperlink behind this. Man, I'm only escape.
I know, but like, I think they're stuck. I think they're stuck.
So it's that one. I'll let it do that. We'll send it to him, yes, sir. That'll be fine. I appreciate that. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So we'll make sure we get that message from CEO Bruce Marks to you, referencing their partnership with us this year. The Land Development Conference, our normal format, will take place October 1st through the 3rd, and then the staff of NACA from several states will come into town to host their Achieve the Dream event. It is where thousands of prospective homeowners come to a 3-day showing in order to be able to get their full mortgage qualification. We plan to do a follow-up event after that for those individuals that are looking anywhere within the CSRA upon approval to introduce them not only to local investors and developers, but our local builders so that we can increase the number of primary residence homeowners that we have here in Augusta, Richmond County. I got IT.
All right. Is that the portion of the presentation that you're going to send us?
The presentation, yes, sir.
All right.
Yeah.
Director, does that conclude your presentation?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
All right. First of all, I want to thank everyone for being here. I see all the First Commissioner Johnson. See the land bank members, visiting directors from Atlanta and Savannah. Certainly appreciate you guys being here today. I'm going to open up for questions. First, I'm going to give the floor to Commissioner Sean Franham from the 7th.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for everyone that is here presenting. Lots of great information. I kind of want to bring it back to our current land bank with some questions. How many current properties do we have?
As of today, 616 show in your GIS system. Our website shows 592. So there are some properties that IT has yet to take out. But if a citizen were to do a search on GIS, they see 616.
And how many of those are HCD?
approximately 250 to 260.
Okay, and then the ones between the 250 and 616, what is the land bank using to maintain the insurance and maintenance on those properties?
We have an insurance policy on everything that we hold in inventory, and for maintenance, we respond appropriately to all of our 311 calls. We have been issuing out lot maintenance requests, receipt for quote, and then sending notice to proceed to 2 separate companies to maintain those. We have 2 companies procure in order to be able to do our demolitions. We have a tree cutting company in order to take care of any overgrown limbs, dead trees, or fallen property. So we've got a nice staff of contracted services in order to be able to maintain property.
Okay. And I wasn't here way back when this was created, obviously, but it was under the impression that the land bank would be self-sustaining, self-sufficient within X amount of years. Do you foresee that happening in the near future or not?
Well, I mean, yes, sir. I think that at some point in time, the land bank could be in a position where it no longer needs to submit an application for general fund infusion. I will quote the finance director that at this time, the general fund infusion only pays about 50% of salary. The remainder of our expenses come from proceeds that are made off land sales. So that's everything from rent, IT, technology, lot maintenance, tree cutting. Every issue that we deal with now comes from proceeds.
And then if there's any sale, does all the sale go back to the land bank, or does any go to the general fund?
So it depends upon the origination of the property. If it is a city transfer and it has to go to a particular type of account, then we are informed of that from city law department, and those proceeds are returned. So an example of that would be the transfer of property that was sold to the Augusta National. Originally, there was an assessed value put on that, and there was an acceptance of that assessed value, but we thought it pertinent to get an appraisal done on that property, which multiplied the return to the city by 5 times.
That's great. The ARP money that was committed to the land bank,
yes, sir.
What was it used for? What's the status of it?
The first tranche, $500,000, was issued and expended. That's been demolitions, lot cutting, tree maintenance, every type of issue we deal with vacant and abandoned properties. The remaining $500,000 is still held by the city at this time.
Okay. A couple more, Mayor. How is the land bank bringing affordable housing to Augusta?
It's 100% partnership. We work with each of the nonprofit CHODOs that go through Housing and Community Development, but we also work with other nonprofits, including those that are members of our Continuum of Care under the Homeless Task Force. We work with independent nonprofit agencies that are not in the homelessness space and sell properties to them. And so anyone that's wanting to do affordable housing, even from the private market, when we sit with individuals and go through a performer in order to discuss what costs will be, we sometimes are able to leverage relationships in order to be able to reduce what their overhead is, and therefore they're able to charge cheaper rents or sell at cheaper prices.
And can you explain how it works with if the HCD purchases houses through HUD, but there's a rental program that's under the land bank? Can you explain that to the general public?
So the land bank does not have a rental program. Housing and Community Development is a city department, and the Land Bank Authority has no regulation over the city. And so those properties that are transacted by Housing and Community Development, a transfer from the Utilities Department, or properties brought in by engineering because they needed to be able to move folks out of Hyde Park, they present to our board independently on behalf of their department, and our board makes a decision. We do not ask department directors to complete our mandatory application because, again, it's the city of Augusta. They do not have to complete our depository agreement requirement because it's the city of Augusta, and they do not pay us any additional fees on anything that they hold.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Commissioner. Chair recognizes Commissioner Stacy Pulliam from the second.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First of all, thank you, everyone that came out. Thank you, Sarah, Odetta, Chris, Allison. Thank you. I greatly appreciate that. Appreciate you all being here. This was a very pertinent work session for me because I know the potential that Augusta has, and just being at different conferences and listening to you all talk about the things that are going on in your city, I know that a lot of that is much needed, and I know that we have the skill set and the talent here in Augusta, Georgia, in our land bank to pull these things off. So thank you so much for the presentations. Some of my questions are actually going to be directed to some of you, if that's okay. Chris, I had a question. When you spoke about a lot of the partnerships or the things that the city of Atlanta did in helping you all, as it pertains to lot maintenance and things of that, what are your different funding sources to be able to help you to do those things?
That's a great question. There is something about the land bank holding itself to a standard as well and making sure that, the lots are maintained. So we actually use some of the general fund increment that we receive. In our annual budget, we set aside funds for the insurance and for the maintenance to do that. And so primarily, so it also depends on programmatic funds coming in there. So if it's properties that are unaffiliated, as I'll call them, then that's from our general fund increment. For instance, we had neighborhood stabilization. A portion of those funds were set aside for the maintenance. So that federal program funded that. When we do our land banking depository program, we pass through those costs to our nonprofit partners. So they actually pay us for those services to do that. So, and then when we bank property on behalf of the city and the development authority, they're the ones footing the bill. We're the ones actually, as Sean alluded to, you guys do here as well. We actually have an RFP for outside vendors that actually do the maintenance, and we just pay them real time to do that. So
you are still receiving funding from the local municipality?
Yes, we will always receive funding from the local municipality because of based on the scale and scope of what we do. This really based on the opportunity to create revenue and income and also meet the affordability goals. There is a break-even point of whereby we have to do a little bit of loss leading to keep that going. And so, yes, we still receive funding from the city, funding from the county, and when City of South Fulton comes in, they will also be making a general fund contribution to support the land bank.
Okay. Thank you so much. And the cadet program that you spoke of, if you could elaborate just slightly on that for me, please.
Sure. So the first one we did was there was a lot, there was actually an old apartment complex that our development authority held, and they actually held it, and they had given it to a developer. The developer defaulted on that. They had to take it back via foreclosure on the loan they gave to them, and then they transferred that property to the land bank. And that was in the old English Avenue, Vine City neighborhoods, which is by our Mercedes-Benz Falcon Stadium. So we actually held that property for 10 years. And we fought off everybody, trying to basically set up encampments, doing all sorts of stuff over there. And then with the Mayor Bottoms, we actually resurrected that project where they basically turned it into, we ended up coordinating the demolition, and then they took over and basically worked with the Police Foundation to create all cadet housing. It was actually one of the first, most recent in the United States. So that's dedicated to only cadets, and these are actually folks going through the academy, so they actually have somewhere to stay while they're going through the training. This new project I mentioned will be also for recruits, cadets, and may include some officer component to it. So it kind of be more of a continuum of that as well. And we also partner with, since I'm mentioning that, so we partner with the Atlanta Police Department and something called the Secure Neighborhood Initiative, where they're actually trying to put officers in neighborhoods, into houses, to basically create a presence. And they basically give them a squad car to park outside their house. And they also give them a stipend to go towards the mortgage to keep them in there. And they basically require those officers to basically go to community meetings, do a little bit more than they would normally do just living there. So that has turned out to be a good program, and one, anecdotally, so across from the street where we had one of these houses, They had the pharmaceutical trade across the street. And they were so curious about what we're doing. And so when we finally, when that house basically came online and they brought the, the mounted police over there and the police chief and everybody else showed up at the house, that was the end of that enterprise across the street. But this is this kind of stuff that we get involved in via the land bank. So.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Director Norman, if you don't mind staring at that, just a quick question. Can you tell me a little bit about your board? What is the makeup of your board? How many members do you have on your board?
We have 7 members of the board. They are all private citizens, and 4 are appointed by the City of Atlanta, and 3 are appointed by the county. And again, that will expand to 9 once we add the City of South Fulton.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much. Just, you may want to stay there. I think.
Stay over here.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Okay. I'm sorry, madam.
That's okay, Mayor Johnson. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. And Allison, I have a couple of questions for you as well. You spoke lastly about the land bank in Savannah. You gave an example of setting sales price criteria for the property for affordable housing. Can you give an example of that?
Yes. What we do now as a board, actually during COVID, we had some developers that acquired some properties, and we have them submit a proposal to us. What are you going to build? We want to know, what are you going to build? What experience do you have? Do you have the capacity? And do you have the funding to do what you say you're going to do? So let's say we have a lot there. They submit a proposal to us. They're going to build a single-family home on that property, and they're going to sell it for $185,000. Well, during COVID, when prices went through the roof, even though we worked with a lot of our developers on, hey, maybe it's going to cost you a little more to build, it's going to take you a little bit longer, because we also put a time frame on that building. We had some developers that said they were going to sell a house for $180,000, and they were selling them for $300,000. So our board was like, wait a minute, that was not the plan. And it kind of got out, hey, land bank's selling properties, and people are flipping them, and they're selling them for a lot of money. So we went into an emergency work session, and we came out with our board saying, we're not going to let this happen anymore. So our board will actually set the maximum sales price that a developer can sell that property for. And right now, our maximum sales price is $255,000. Now, that sounds probably high. Most of our homes are being sold for around $200,000 right now. As I said, we'll work with the developer. We'll let them do a combination of up to 50% market rate and not. But we actually take those restrictions and we put them in our sales contract, and we put them into the deed when the property is sold. And we set that a property on our affordable houses has to remain affordable at 80% AMI or below for 10 years.
Okay. Thank you. And can you also, echoing Mayor Johnson's question about the board, can you tell us about the makeup of your board, please?
Yes, we have 5 board members. 2 of them are appointed by the city, 2 of them are appointed by the county, and then those 4 appoint the 5th board member. We have the assistant county manager on our board from the county. We have the head of our, I would say it's the equivalent of maybe an assistant city manager at the city, but it's called something else. They have a different title. It's a bureau chief. She oversees all of the community services in the housing department. She sits on our board. We have a real estate person on our board. And then we have an employee from the county on our board that oversaw inspections and building safety and that type of thing. And then we also have special, we have advisors to our board, and that is the tax commissioner's office, the housing authority, Habitat for Humanity, and the school board.
Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you for answering my questions. And before I yield the floor, I just want to say, this session was so imperative, because as I look at the the makeup of my district, District 2, where when I asked for the numbers the last time, I think I had the highest count of blighted properties in my area. And then even as we talked about crime, as Chris mentioned, what they're doing with the cadet program, I see where all of these things can be so useful, especially how the land bank attains property and looking at it block by block and not just scattered site. So we have to implore our land bank and make sure that we are utilizing it. If we're saying that there's a problem with affordable housing, if we're saying that there's a homeless crisis that's going on, we have a tool in our toolbox, and we need to be able to come together to see how can we make sure that we are utilizing that tool to the utmost of the actual, like what it can be used for. Mr. Edwards, did you have something
I just wanted to give you a tidbit, Commissioner.
And I'm sorry, I stepped out of line.
And I did as well. My apologies.
Mr. Edwards, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mayor Johnson.
We had a conversation a couple of years ago with Sheriff Roundtree and an Officer Next Door program, because we've seen those in other areas. This is during one of the previous fiscal year's budget sessions, and one of the difficulties Sheriff Roundtree was having with recruitment was the amount of money that his officers made and their ability to be able to live on that. We thought that it would be pertinent for him to be able to have an additional recruiting tool. And so we discussed utilizing grant dollars in order to be able to bring officers into rental properties that had those dollars infused into the development. But his officers made more than the 80% area median income limit. So being that the land bank wants to partner with initiatives that the city needs to have happen, we've been working with private investors. Anyone that's building a 4-unit property or less under FHA still qualifies as a single-family home. So as we're getting private investors to build duplexes, triplexes, and quads within Augusta, Richmond County, we're encouraging them to make one of those units affordable for an officer. Because if you're in the urban core, the officer and that car then helps with perception of safety and crime and allows for you to have a greater opportunity in order to rent your other units. So although it is a very unique way to try to get to that goal, I did want to let Commissioner Pulliam know that we're making headway in trying to make that happen without having to utilize any funding from the city.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mayor Johnson. I yield.
Thank you, Commissioner Pulliam. Thank you, Director Edwards, for that dialogue. Commissioner Wayne Guilfoyle from the 10th, the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Miss Allison Godley. I actually got a good friend of mine. We spent a lot of time down there in Rincon, Georgia.
Oh, good.
Within
Great.
Chatham County.
Yeah.
Growing community right there.
It is.
I wish I would have bought property about 15 years back.
Me too.
So you was talking about some of the developments, actually giving money to contractors to develop houses in blighted areas, et cetera. We actually have a HCD, Housing Community Development, which actually gives down payment and construction money to nonprofits to build affordable housing workforce. And I know you, as well as Mr. Norman, stated not every land bank will be the same.
Right.
And so we actually have a set-aside department, and actually Mr. Edwards had, during his presentation, had showed most of his thing was the success under Hawthorne Welcher's Laney Walker development. So I just want to let you know that yes, you are correct. Not every land bank is the same, and every one will be molded differently.
Right, and we work very closely with what our housing department, which I think is similar to your department.
Yes.
They provide construction loan money at a lower interest rate to nonprofits. Our land bank will actually allow a builder to put 10% down on the purchase of the property, and then they have a 90% loan at no interest for 12 months, and they don't have to pay us until they sell that house or at the end of that 12 months.
Okay. We thank you. Mr. Norman, can I ask you a question, sir? I appreciate you coming before us. It was a long ride for you as well as
no problem.
Ms. Godley. You were talking about your board, how it was made up between the city and the county. As far as your accountability for the board, with you being funded by both the city and the county, municipality. Do you have to show your cost for year, your gains? In other words, open your checkbook to show. Would you have profits or losses for the year? How does that work out in the city of Atlanta?
Sure. So we have, so it's unrestricted, we receive restricted funds and unrestricted money. So it kind of depends on it. So the unrestricted funds that come through the general fund allocations just come into our coffers. So we actually have independent accountants, bookkeepers that basically keep our books. We have financial audits that we basically earn to go, and those are available as well. When we were getting community development block grant money, federal money, part of that whole program is we actually had to have more robust reporting of what we do, but our books are available. The city does not require an audit of us nor the county, but we do internally have those financial controls in place to basically do that, so we can demonstrate, what we've used money for and all that. And we do an annual report to City Council and to the Commission, and we can provide as much information as they want. We typically do not do a granular financial statement presentation when we do that, but it's available.
Okay, I definitely appreciate it, and be safe in your travels back home, sir.
Oh, thank you very much.
Can I talk to the director, Mr. Sean Edwards?
Yes, sir. Director Edwards.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Edwards, thank you for bringing this whole group of people here before us to tell us how other cities, how other counties' land bank work, and as well as their successes. I know that our makeup our board is the tax commissioner, which is appointed for 4 years based on your, what you was telling me on the March 6th, where we had changed from 5 to 7 members. Mm-hmm. We have the tax commissioner, planning and development for 3 years, administrator for 3 years, tax assessor for 2 years, at-large member for 2 years, at-large member 2 years, as well as another at-large member for 4 years, which is odd. So every one of these members are appointed by this commission every year, 2 years, 4 years, et cetera. How is that appointments done?
So the makeup of your board is decided by this body.
Okay.
You have the authority in order to be able to change that via motion and amendment at any point in time.
Okay. I appreciate that. One of the other things that I'm going to chime on, Commissioner Frannon, where the administrator, I guess 2.5 years ago, had gave the land bank $1 million, and you had stated that you spent $500,000, the other half still in the coffers. Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay. So with that money, it was supposed to be used for demolishing, clearing, abandoned houses, and provide rental houses in certain areas. How many houses have we developed to date? None?
That is correct. The remaining $500,000 is still being held by the city of Augusta. And so we tackled those priorities that could be met with the first tranche, those that you've listed and included, and we sent monthly reports to your finance department verifying those expenditures. We're waiting to receive that second tranche so that we can start that living wage program.
Is there something that we as commissioners could do to expedite the funding to where you could actually move on it? Because it's been two plus years.
We've had great communication with the finance office. They're waiting on our audit. The office of Matt Verdery has been in constant contact with us, but he is getting out of the quasi-governmental audit business, and they are transitioning us out. So when our audit is prepared, it will be delivered to your finance director, and we should then be able to enact our MOU with you in order to be able to receive those funds.
Okay. One other question. I see you got NACA coming October 4th, 6th, that the land bank is doing. I didn't see anywhere on there where the HCD was a part of that conference. Why not?
So we have had communication with the local, regional, and national level offices of NACA for about a month and a half now.
Right.
Prior to ever coming to work for the city of Augusta, I used to be the Augusta director of the NACA office, and I actually grew that region from just Augusta to Macon and Savannah. During my tenure there, it was difficult in order to be able to get our homes processed in such a way that we could take advantage of city-based programs. And so I tried to be able to build a strong relationship with your Housing and Community Development Department, which I did with, at the time, Chester Wheeler's staff.
Right, I remember Chester.
Yep. I would say based upon the position of the local office and its leadership at this time, there were efforts to try to be able to bring such an event here. I was made aware that they've had them in Albany. There was an invitation that was sent to the city of Augusta to attend their Achieve the Dream event in Selma, Alabama, which brought more than 10,000 prospective home buyers to that event. But I reached out to an organization that I once worked with, that I still believe in and that I support, and we were able to form that partnership. The moment that Bruce Marks saw that it was me on the Zoom call, we immediately bypassed everything that would have been traditional, and he said he was coming to Augusta.
Right. And, you know, because your presentation, your success was showing Laney Walker, hand in hand, land bank and HCD works.
Oh, yes,
for
sir.
to see it successful. That was the only reason why I couldn't. I was looking at that NACA and I didn't see him. I said, that's odd.
Yes, sir. So I would say my first year coming into the organization, the SOPs that I wrote for the land bank perfectly aligned with what Housing and Community Development were doing under their housing plan. But when it comes to that nonprofit at its national level, it has to go where it is invited.
Right, and HCD has over 200, you said 250 something?
About 250, 260 out of the 616 in our
properties
inventory.
in your bank?
That's correct.
That's good. Mr. Edwards, thank you for your conversation with
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Commissioner Guilfoyle. Chair recognizes Commissioner Tony Lewis from the 6th.
Thank you, Mayor Johnson. This question isn't geared to any one particular individual, but whoever can probably best answer it, I'd appreciate it. And there's been a lot of discussions about the makeup of the boards, of land bank boards. In Augusta, ours is pretty unique because of the fact that we have, can I say, some elected officials, some city employees that are on our particular land bank board. And to some, it doesn't look favorable to have those individuals on those boards being voting members of the board, whereby some wants them to be ex officio members. Can any one of you help me to understand or speak on the makeup of some of the other boards that you know about in the state of Georgia? I think you said there's about 30 boards in the state of Georgia. And can you help me understand some of the makeup where these board members hail from? You know, are they city employees? You know, I understand Atlanta to have a board of 7, 4 from Atlanta, some three from another part. They're all basically just board members that are selected. But is there a problem with having board members that actually work for the city or the municipality in which your land bank is on? And I know Atlanta is probably not the norm. So somebody can speak on that.
I'm just kicking it off, and then I'm going to pass the baton. So we actually, when we were formed, we actually had a county commissioner and a city council person on our board up until 2005. So basically, for 20 years, there was always at least an elected official on our board. Nancy Boxer was a commissioner, a longtime commissioner in Fulton County. When she retired, they just never replaced her. And then also, when I actually came onto the board in Atlanta, the outgoing city councilman left to go run for office, and it was at their discretion that they've never done that. But there's always been the opportunity to have an elected official that's identified in the statute, and city employees, county employees, anybody can be on the board as well. So, but I'll let my lawyer friend over here talk about that stuff. She actually helped when we revised the statute, so I'll let you.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. I would say in my experience across the state, first of all, Chris is correct. So under the statute, that's up to the creating elected bodies, right, who appoint the board members. In my experience, it really varies. There are a number of land banks. We're working with a land bank right now in Thomasville. I believe the majority of the board is all elected officials at the city and county level. Certainly aware of a number of land banks that have primarily city or county staff as board members. Sometimes that derives from the inventory of property that the land bank is asked to address. It is always helpful, I would submit, whether key staff or employees from city or county or tax commissioner's office are board members or just advisors. Always helpful, of course, to have their expertise and partnership for the land bank. Again, we're dealing typically with vacant, abandoned, tax delinquent, subject to other liens, and then of course the land bank is wanting to work in partnership with existing city or county plans, et cetera. But truly, there's 30 and counting. We don't necessarily know about every single land bank. Some of them are being created in real time, but of the 159 counties in Georgia, 30 plus do have functioning land banks. And again, wide variety, some primarily elected officials, some primarily city staff, some all community residents who are not an elected representative. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
You got it. Commissioner Jordan Johnson from the first. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This question is for Director Edwards. Director Edwards, it's good to see you, brother.
You as well.
Let me start off by saying I like that blue and white. Commissioner Lewis, do you see that blue and white on his lapel?
More specifically, crimson and cream.
Crimson and cream. Look, just a real simple question. What do you need from the commission to be able to help you create more affordable housing opportunities for the city? When I was in Tampa, I sent you a text about pallet homes. And Commissioner Lewis and Commissioner Pulliam and Commissioner Scott, myself, we went inside of a pallet home, and I'm just like, we need these in Augusta. And I texted you and told you this is something we're going to throw on the agenda soon.
Yes, sir.
But we're thinking about that. There's a lot of talk about the board makeup. Cool. But let's talk about the nuts and bolts here, right? There are about 24% of people in our city living in poverty.
Mm-hmm.
And that looks, and that looks different depending on what side of town you're on.
Yes, sir.
But poverty is poverty.
Yeah.
Housing is too unaffordable.
Mm-hmm.
Rent is too high. What can we be doing to help get to a better place with housing affordability? And not even just housing affordability, but neighborhoods like Sunset Park. I bet if I asked anybody, do they know where Sunset Park is, they're probably gonna be like, what, where? There's a neighborhood called Sunset Park, and it's probably only about, 4 or 5 streets?
Yeah. Yeah.
But if you go back there, you don't even know folks are living there.
That's right.
But they're living in those conditions. They have no other choice.
Yeah.
What can we be doing to work with the land bank to help y'all reach your goals, to help the relationship between the land bank and HCD grow? What do you need from us? Because I do believe that we're in a really good position to deliver on affordable housing if we focus on that versus other stuff. And we focus specifically on affordable housing through the land bank. I think we can get there.
Yeah.
What do you need from us?
Let me check and see if my co-chair is still here, in case he need to pull my chain.
Who is that?
That's Mr. Scott Roundtree.
Oh. Scott says, go for it, go for it.
Honestly, you've got great resources here. I have worked in multiple capacities with several of your department directors. When it comes to subject matter expert experience education, you have what you need here. What I have seen to be successful in, I would say, sister cities that have land banks and or land trusts, really well-trained, educated department directors, and clear leadership is strategic planning and then support and resources. I'll quote former Commissioner Marion Williams, that if I give you what you need, I should get what I want. So we often need to simply come out of our silos, work collectively toward common goal, and give you a deliverable that bypasses all of the obstacles that we deal with working individually. A great example of that is your redevelopment blight ordinance. The ad hoc committee had every pertinent type of input. It was code enforcement, it was the marshal's office, it was the tax commissioner, it was the tax assessor, it was housing, it was engineering, it was utilities, it was the land bank. If we tackled more issues that way, like affordable housing, to say where does your authority, power, influence end and where does mine begin, and work collectively toward goal, you'd see better outcomes. Now, that may require that this body set some priorities, and I'm not trying to make a recommendation to the body, of course, but set some priorities that then therefore put some other things further down on the list. We are in an affordable housing crisis in Augusta, Georgia. Your homeless count is increasing. Those at the verge of homelessness, which we call housing instability, is increasing, while simultaneously we're seeing the progress of great development on multifamily high-density rental at higher prices than we've ever seen. As new jobs come in, as new trades come in, as new persons come in to take advantage of our cyber center, the growth of our military base, the growth of our hospital district, they make higher incomes than most of your long-term native residents. And so as we become a city that is more appealing to those individuals, we are also seeing greater scarcity of those persons who once were here. That's a hard line as a government official, and I don't envy it. Because you've got to try to get on one of the two trains. Am I going to ensure that this 50-year resident can stay? Or am I going to create a neighborhood that that new employee wants? But if you don't make that decision, deterioration and competition are going to make it for you. You don't have the luxury of time to see if Aiken County going to stop growing, because their housing starts outpace us leaps and bounds. We've got to become something, and the land bank is your tool to do the necessary level of acquisition, and my experience is at your disposal as desired in order to be able to try to brainstorm those options. When it comes to just affordable housing, it is a funding issue because labor and materials do cost, and because most of that is going to be grant dollars, there are going to be requirements that it is legal labor paid at the appropriate wage. If you choose to do more market rate stuff, single family, to increase prices in neighborhoods, that definitely helps. And the finance department, I am sure, based on conversations I've had with Mr. Schreier, would appreciate that, because you do need some higher priced properties within these communities in order to be able to help with the tax base. It's a matter of finding that balance. And so we are available at any time, small group, individually, or on this floor, to say, well, this is the position that we have. These are the connections and relationships and experience that we have in other parts of the state and the country to give you feedback, template, and example of the things you're trying to do, so you don't reinvent the wheel and we don't waste time that we don't have.
And see, I'm glad you said that. and that was really the purpose of my question, and I'm glad you said it, was because I think, some of us look at the land bank much differently, because Commissioner Pulliam mentioned that majority of the properties are in her district, a good majority in mine as well. So when you look at a neighborhood like Turpin Hill, you look at the Bethlehem community, you look at Sunset Park, you look at Laney Walker, you look at Harrisburg, you look at these communities that we grew up in, you look at the area around Macaulay Street, you look at all these neighborhoods that contributed to our upbringing, like those aren't just road names, right? When we see blighted properties, to us, those aren't just opportunities to make money and to build wealth. Those are neighborhoods that we used to buy chips and soda from on the way to school, or that was the house of the deacon that was at the church when we were. These neighborhoods mean something to us. And so I'm looking at this from the perspective of, the conversation about the board keeps coming up, and I believe that's political in nature, not really worried about that. But how can we take these communities and build them in a way to where the young people live in Eastgate Apartments, which is at Laney Walker Extension and East Boundary, they flood when it rains and it's mold all over the apartments. How can they get out of that situation into something that's better? Like, those are young families with young children living there. So I get a little passionate about it, man. I know Commissioner Pulliam, Commissioner Lewis, we all do. Commissioner Mitt, not everybody does. Because these neighborhoods, again, these aren't just properties that we can just go and buy and say, oh, I'm gonna be rich and flip properties. No. This is where my grandfather grew up. This is where my grandmama raised my mama. And I think that if we start looking at it from that perspective about how to turn these communities back over to be thriving communities and not just opportunities to push property to whoever, I look forward to what the future can hold. So I would be interested in having another workshop or another session somewhere down the line to talk about how we can really push resources and then be intentional about what we're funding. All this community development money that we have going out to all these different entities and agencies, if we centralize that money towards housing for teachers, housing for firefighters, housing for sheriff's deputies, housing for first-time buyers, then you'll see Augusta grow. Then you'll start seeing us outpace counties around us. So I don't know, I'm just talking out loud, thinking out loud, but I want to take my hat off to you and thank you for what you're doing, and I hope that we can have a round two to this pretty soon.
Yes, sir. And if I may just to add to what you noted. So at our conference, we've invited DCA to come down, Georgia Department of Community Affairs. They have a plethora of programs designed to be able to help investors and developers, but also things to be able to help home buyers. And we thought it was important in order to be able to have them here so that we start to get intentional about the type of product we want to see. Neighborhoods can be for everyone. That is a reality. You can have subsidized affordable rental in order to make space for very low income persons. You can have subsidized home ownership in order to be able to hit the low to mod population. And you can have high density or single family detached market rate neighborhoods can be for everyone. You have to be strategic in the planning. You have to be intentional about the utilization of resource, and you have to collaborate. And if you do that, you'll see success. Again, you have the talent in this city to be able to achieve that. We have proven that when put to that test by this body that we can work together in order to meet common goal.
Thank you, bro.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
All right, thank you, Director Edwards. See no colleagues in the queue. We have some members of the public. Is there anybody that'd like to make a public comment or statement? Seeing none. Colleagues, are we good? Certainly thank our guests for traveling west or east. Appreciate you guys being here. God's traveling grace getting home. Be good. Madam Clerk, this meeting's hereby adjourned. Thank you.
But it's all good. No danger being bored. You're welcome.
Same here. Oh, thank you. Now you are, what's your?
Zena McLean. I'm one of the attorneys for Augusta, and I also just I'm assigned to claim.
Okay. Well, you guys are essential. Good stuff.
Yeah, but you guys are doing
Yeah, we just this year got our own.